I'd like you to welcome Mary Heaney with her speech entitled Janie Mary.
Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmaster and friends, I chose a wonderful short story called Janie Mary, and this is a story that I've loved for years. I actually came across this story in first year in secondary school, and despite what you might think, that's not today or yesterday, I can assure you. To me, it's one of the saddest, most poignant stories I think I've ever read, and it's about poverty in Dublin in the 1940s. And the story is told through the eyes of a little 5-year-old girl called Janie Mary, whose mother sends her out looking for food. And it is just so sad. And what's tragic to me is that 80 years later, we still have child poverty. So we must all be aware of it. And I'm not duplicitous when I tell you that it would be something that would concern me a lot. So here we go, Janie Mary. Janie Mary by James Plunkett. When Janie Mary turned the corner into Nicholas Street that morning, she leaned wearily against a shop front to rest. Her small head was bowed, and the hair, which was so nondescript and unclean, covered her face. Her small hands gripped one another for warmth across the faded bodice of her frock. Around the corner lay Canning cottages, with their tiny frost-gleaming gardens and gates that were noisy and freezing to touch. She had tried each of them in turn. Her timid knock was well known to the people who lived in Canning cottages. That morning some of them said, "It's that little Carty one. Never mind opening. Twice in the last week she's been round. It's too much of a good thing." Those who did answer had been gruff. "Tell her mammy," they said. "It's at school they should have that 5-year-old, and not out worrying poor people the likes of us." The school was in Nicholas Street, and children with satchels were already passing. Occasionally, Janie Mary could see a few paper books peeping out from an open flap, and beside them a child's lunch and a bottle of milk. In the schoolroom was a scrawled and incomprehensible blackboard with rows of staring faces who sniggered when Janie Mary was stupid in her answers. Sometimes Father Benedict would visit the school. He asked questions in catechism, and he gave the children sweets. He was a huge, kind man with more intuition than intellect, more genuine affection for children than for learning. One day, he found Janie Mary sitting by herself in the back seat. She felt him giant-like above her, and as he placed some rat sweets on her desk. "And what's your name, little girl?" "Janie Mary Carty, Father." "Well, I'm Father Benedict of the Augustinians. Where do you live?" Father Benedict managed to push and shove his way into sitting beside her. Quite suddenly, Janie Mary felt safe and warm. She said easily, "I lives in Canning cottages." He talked to her while the teacher continued self-consciously with her lesson. "So, your daddy works in the meat factory?" "No, Father. My daddy's dead." Father Benedict nodded and patted her shoulder. "You and I must be better friends, Janie," he said. "We must tell your mammy to send you to school more often." "Yes, Father." "Would you always come?" "I'd like to come, Father." Father Benedict had talked to her for some time like that. The pair of them crushed clumsily in the desk with their heads close together. When he was leaving, he gave her more sweets. Later, the teacher took them from her as a punishment and gave them out again as prizes for neatness. She thought of Father Benedict until an old beggar who was passing said to her, "Are you whinging, child? Is there anything up with you?" She lifted her head and looked stupidly at him, her mouth open and her eyes quite dry. "You look a bit shook, kid," he said. "Are you after taking a turn?" "No, mister," she said, wondering. "I'm only going to look for bread at St. Nicholas's. My mammy sent me." "Your mammy left it a bit late. They'll be going in for to pray now." She turned suddenly and ran quickly up the length of the street. But when she reached the priory, the doors were closed and the waiting queue had broken into small knots. She stopped uncertainly and stared for some time. The priests, the people said, had gone in to pray. They would be back in an hour. She was glad to turn homewards. She was tired and her bare feet moved reluctantly on the ice-cold pavement. Johnny might have been given some bread on his rounds with the sticks, or her mother might have some hidden away. Her mother sometimes did that, so that Janie Mary would try very hard to get some. "There was none," she said, looking up at her mother's face. "Nobody would give it, and the man said the priest won't be back for an hour." She looked around hopefully as she spoke, but there was only a few crumbs on the table. They littered its grease-fouled, sticky cover. Now that she was home, she realised how endless the morning's trudging had been. She realised how every door had been closed against her. Her mother's voice rose. "Then you can do with that. Are you after looking at all, you little trollop? 2 hours to go the length of the street and Johnny famished, but for the little bit I put aside. Gallivanting with your pals. Well, I'll gallivant you. Back you can go again. Back with you to the priest's house and wait, like any Christian, for what's going." Janie Mary went wearily out the door and trudged slowly in her bare feet to St. Nicholas's. Here the priest had erected a wooden counter on the high steps before the priory, and the two brothers stood to watch the forming of the queue. Janie Mary looked hard through the veil, which blurred occasionally in front of her eyes, but she could catch no sight of Father Benedict. No bread had yet appeared, though the queue was growing. She took her place and kept close to the wall. Near the wall she found that it was easier to hold her position. But it soon became frightening to be in so close to the wall, to be so small that everybody towered above you. Janie Mary felt very weak and wanted to get out. When she glanced sideways or ahead of her, all she could see were tightly packed bodies, and when she looked down there were feet, but no ground. She tried to look upwards, but could not. An hour passed before Father Benedict appeared on the steps. The crowd got excited. "Father Benedict, God bless him," they said. "He'll be coming down soon now that he's here." Janie Mary was lifted clear off the ground by the movement of the crowd and lost her place. Now she was behind a stooped-back man with a threadbare coat and heavily nailed boots. His collar was flaked and greasy with dandruff, and his coat was foul-smelling. But it was the boots which held Janie Mary's attention. They clattered unsteadily on the pavement very close to her bare feet. There were diamond-shaped nails in double rings around the heels of them. She bent to keep her eyes fixed on the boots and wriggled to avoid them. Her attention became fixed on them. To a man near her she said, "I want to get out, mister, let me get out." But even if he had heard her, he could not have helped her now. She tried to attract attention, but they had forgotten her. They kept telling one another over and over again what each of them already knew. "It's coming," they said, pressing forward. "It's coming." And after a while the murmuring changed and the queue surged. "Look," they said, "it's here." Janie Mary was lifted once more. Once more her feet were clear off the ground and her breathing stifled by the pressure of those around her. She was in danger now, and clawed simpering at the dandruff-flaked collar. Through a whirl of arms and shoulders she had a view of Father Benedict, his broad shoulders tall and firm against the press of bodies. She tried to call out to him. "The chiseler," someone said, noticing. "For God's sakes, quit pushing! Look at the chiseler!" A man threw out his hand to grip her, but a movement of the crowd twisted him suddenly aside. She saw his hand grabbing futilely to the left. As the crowd parted, she began to slip. "Father Benedict," she said faintly, "Father Benedict." Then the man in front stumbled, and the nail boots crushed heavily on her feet. When her eyes opened again, she was on the sofa in the visitors' parlour. Father Benedict and one of the lay brothers were bending over her. Someone had put a rug round her. An electric fire glowed warmly against the opposite wall, and over it hung a framed picture of the Sacred Heart. Her feet felt numb and heavy, and the picture swam before her eyes. But it was warm in the parlour, and the morning searching was over. And then she remembered the bread and her mother's words. She moved suddenly, but when she tried to speak, her ears were filled with noise. The lay brother had turned to Father Benedict. "You were very quick," he said. "Is she badly hurt?" Father Benedict, answering, said in a strange voice, "Only her feet. You can see the print of the nails."